Hey everybody, we are back for another episode with my friend Daniel Reed. Daniel, I have to tell you that I have to, on purpose, try to say your name right. I need to confess this to you. If I have some little speech impediment where I say Daniel
Oh,
instead
yeah,
of
I can get that.
Daniel, and
Daniel.
I've been catching myself doing that lately, so I wanted to confess that
Yeah,
sin to you, and I ask
I
for your
appreciate that. I
forgiveness.
receive that, and just know that I hear you, I see you,
I appreciate it, man.
and I forgive you.
Thank
It
you.
is weird
Well,
to think about. I never stop and think about that there's a "y" in my name.
yeah, it's. I don't know why, but I have to purposely say Daniel and
Yes.
not Daniel.
Daniel.
But I had a friend growing up that used to call me Nathan instead of Nathan, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
It never made me mad, so hopefully it doesn't make you mad.
Yeah. I grew up with my own dad calling me the wrong name for a long time.
You're good. You're good.
So my
Yeah.
brother's
So
name is David, so we would get mixed up all the time.
yeah, the
So
two
I'm
D's.
with it. Some of my friends
Yeah.
in college just bailed and started to call me Don.
There you go. That's perfect. Well, to rein it back in, this episode we're going to be talking about the third word in our podcast name, which is Shalom.
Mm-hmm.
What is it all about? Is it just how you say goodbye when you're in Israel, or does it have a deeper meaning? And so today we're going to be talking about peace in English and peace, Shalom, in Hebrew and in Greek, and what those words mean. But you may be thinking, that doesn't sound like an interesting conversation, but it is, because we believe that shalom has a deeper meaning than maybe our English translation comes across. And that deeper meaning makes you dream about the world in a brand new way. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm excited to talk about. So let's get to some definitions. Welcome back. Glad that you're here.
Yeah.
And we just came off of a debt annihilation conversation, which is kind of, I think, a great example of
Yeah.
what we think shalom and peace is all about.
Yeah.
And so we thought this would dovetail pretty well to cover our three big words of Jubilee, freedom, and shalom. And so, Daniel, if you want to define in English, what does peace mean, and maybe what shalom means that's more than that?
Yeah. I'll flip it to you. How would you, without your turn off what you know already about Shalom, how would you define peace? Just like your average English speaker, how would you?
It's like a goodbye. Peace.
Peace.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just means like just not bad things going on.
Yeah.
Peacetime. Just we're not in a war right now.
Tranquility.
Yeah, it's
Freedom
just
from.
no conflict
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So that is true. That is a true statement of what peace is. But excuse me, when we look at biblical peace, the difference is that our English word, it's more of peace is just an absence of something. So it's just absence of conflict. If you think more as like a relationship with somebody, peace would just be like, we're good. We're not, maybe not conflict, but there's also not any, long-standing disagreements. We get along, our personalities kind of jive, and everything's good. And peace really just applies after there is a conflict. Almost, it's almost like it's a reactive thing. So you only talk about peace if there isn't peace, and you end up making peace. Then there's peace. But biblical peace is actually a more proactive thing. So it's not just the absence of conflict, it's actually the absence of conflict in the presence of something else. And something better in its place. And that concept is shalom. And it really actually means complete or whole. So in the Old Testament, it can refer to a stone that has a whole or complete shape with no cracks. It's Joshua 8. The word shalom is used. It can also refer to, if you look at like an entire stone wall that has no gaps or missing bricks, that wall, you could say that wall is shalom. And ultimately, shalom it refers to something that is complex with a lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces, but that's in a state of completeness or wholeness. So I think the stone wall, in my mind, I don't know about you, but the stone wall makes the most sense to me. So I can picture a wall, and you think about ancient times. If there was a hole, like a gap in your wall, it's obviously not complete, and then obviously like there, it won't be peaceful. People will
Right.
be able to just walk into your city.
Right.
That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
Um,
And so we're just to let everyone know, like, if you want to rate really great, I think it's one of their shorter videos, but the
yeah,
Bible Project has one that's specifically about the word shalom.
it's in
Um,
the Advent study, word study, and it's one of the words they study in that.
yeah, so it's a good one, and um, I think it's also interesting that in our language, we can talk about peace or at peace, but in Hebrew, shalom is actually a verb. So if
Mm,
I said, Daniel, go peace, or go spread peace, I guess we need to kind of transform a
yeah,
bit, but we would still be like, okay, that would mean I need to go find like relationships in conflict and nations in conflict and resolve those conflicts, but it wouldn't be this proactive leaning into,
right.
like you were talking about before, where it's like it's not just absence, but it's the presence of something. So
Right. And it the translators of the Bible, I think they've done a good job in how they've translated shalom. It's just there are some factors of it that we miss. Um, so like Job refers to his tents and in Job 5, and nothing is missing or out of place, and he says it is shalom. David, when he goes to the battlefield to visit his brothers, this is right before he fights Goliath. He asks them about their shalom. So evidently, it's can be something about your well-being.
right.
But when Solomon finishes the temple, in First Kings, it is said that it is shalom. He makes it complete. He restores it. And in that one, for sure, there wasn't any conflict. Nothing was wrong. It was more that there was something missing that needed to be completed. There were gaps, there were holes. This temple needed to be completed, and he brought wholeness and completeness and shalom.
Right.
And so the same concept can hold for relationships. You know, like Proverbs 16:7. So to reconcile and heal a broken relationship is to bring shalom. That's the word that's used. And when rival kingdoms in the Bible make shalom or make peace, like we would say, it isn't, I think for us, it's more like we're just going to commit to not fighting each other, or we're not necessarily going to get along, but we're just going to not shoot each other. But in the Bible, rival kingdoms, if they're making shalom, that was intense. That was like, we're making peace, so we're going to stop fighting, but we're also going to start working together. There's something that needs to be restored here, and we're going to work on that. And that's the state of shalom was what Israel's kings were supposed to cultivate, and it rarely, if ever, happened. And so then Isaiah looks to a future day of a future king. He calls him the Prince of Shalom, the Prince of Peace, that would bring the ultimate shalom that has no end. And this time, God would make a covenant of shalom with his people and make everything right and heal everything that is incomplete and broken. So if you go all the way back, which we often will, but if you go all the way back to the garden, the people in the garden with God, everything was shalom. Before the creation of the world, there was disorder, there was chaos. God brought shalom. He brought completeness and wholeness to the disorder and the chaos of the world, and created a garden where man and woman had right relationship with each other, where man had right relationship with creation and right relationship with God. And then in Genesis 3, that falls apart. And from then on, God has been pursuing his people, trying to make the relationship right between he and his creation. And so that all leads all the way up to Jesus. And the Greek word is kind of hard to say. but it's Eirene. Whenever I say that, Emily's like, Eirene day. But Jesus' birth in the New Testament is announced as the arrival of Eirene. And what we know is that his life, his death, his resurrection, this was the final move that God was making to make peace ultimately between messed up humans and himself. And the idea is that Jesus restored the broken relationship between humans and God to wholeness and to completeness. So, from the Old Testament all the way through, the word can refer to a lot of different things. But ultimately, I think the best definition that we can use, actually, I think Paul picks up on it pretty well. The language of completeness or wholeness. So something being missing, something being corrupted, and that can happen, via conflict, or it can be something else that happens. But that shalom is the idea of restoration, of making things complete. So you were saying it's a verb. To do shalom would be to restore things that are broken,
or to even repay someone.
Yeah,
like in a very physical sense,
right? And the language Paul uses is ministers of reconciliation, and I think that's the same. I think that's the same idea that he's tapping into,
to reconcile or heal something, and in a very practical way. I think the word is used when it's like, my animal messed up your stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring shalom back by replacing
22.
that and trying to pay you back for what was damaged.
Right. There's something wrong there, and we need to.
So it can cross from like emotional to financial to, whatever plane of existence we exist on in so many different ways, as far as mental, emotional, financial. There's so many parts of us. Shalom can cross into whatever is needed to make things whole and right and good again.
And for me, I think the biggest key is peace as I understood it. And I don't think anyone ever told me this outright, but as I understood it growing up, is a fairly passive thing. And I think that might come from different movements that we've had here in the States, that, peace is like being ultra pacifist, ultra whatever it is, just being extremely passive. And I think some people communicated to me at some point that, either directly or indirectly, that like Jesus dying on the cross is a passive form of peace or something like that. And from what I have come to understand about the word shalom in the Bible, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's an accurate image of what's going on. I think that shalom seems to very clearly point to a proactive replacing the broken things with right things, fixing the things that are not complete, and that we have a job as followers of Jesus, just like he was running around making shalom in the world as a part of his ministry. We have a job to continue to do that, to take all of the things that the enemy has stolen, quote Will Reagan, to take back everything the enemy has stolen and plunder the pits of hell and restore things to right relationship between people, between God, between creation. And I think that, if you really think about it, that is like, it connects everything in the story of the Bible from beginning to end. About like, it answers a lot of questions about what we're doing. Why are we here? What is God up to? What does it matter to me? Why is he involving me? And I think it's a really cool image that helps me understand what I'm supposed to be up to.
Right. There's two things. I really like that Jesus called the Prince of Peace, but I have this sometimes urge to, because we change the meaning of words sometimes, or deflate the meaning of words sometimes when they come into different languages. A part of me wishes there's a Bible that like kept some of these Hebrew words just what they are, and force us to be like, Because at Christmas time, you'll see he's the Prince of Peace, but I would rather see the Prince of Shalom. And he's called, behind those words, it's actually Prince of Shalom. It comes across to us and is, peace. But we have our own version, or it's not, our word peace doesn't carry as much with it as Shalom does.
Yeah.
And so it makes me want to start saying, the Prince of Shalom instead. And
sounds a lot more epic too.
It does. And when you know what the full scope of what Shalom is up to, it when you think of Jesus as being the prince of the Shalom effort, that's a really cool thought to me. And I think about being a miniature, I'm Christ, Christian, I'm a little Christ.
Little Christ, yeah.
I want to be a little, bringer of Shalom into the world in whatever ways I can.
Duke of Shalom.
Yeah, something lesser than, but still bringing it. And so another thing that's really interesting to me is that in Hebrew, it is used as a greeting and as a farewell, goodbye. I think it works both ways, just like in Hawaiian. Aloha works in both directions.
Yeah,
maybe.
Or like ciao.
So I really love it when language bakes in all this stuff to your even greeting each other. Obviously is like a very, very common, on the top 10 things of interaction. If you're going to learn a few things, like,
do you know the background of the word aloha?
I don't.
I feel like there's probably a lot baked into that.
I don't actually know
but keep going.
It probably technically means something really cool, but Shalom, it is used as a greeting, but it's not just hello, goodbye. Like in English, like, what does hello mean? Like, is it pointing us to some belief we have or some underpinning, thing in our, how we conceive of the world, like our worldview? I don't know that hello to me is anything more than just a sound. Does that make sense? Like hello.
Yeah.
You're like, what? I don't know what that means. Goodbye, I feel like has some little story to it where it's like God bye, goodbye.
God
like
with you.
God go with you. We've heard Godspeed, when someone, it's more for like ships and travels, but Godspeed.
Yeah.
And so that's like, okay, God be with you as you go kind of a thing. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of baked in a little bit, but hello is just like, just a sound that we made up to when we see other humans that we haven't seen in a long time. And so
I don't even say hello. I usually say hey.
Hey, yeah.
I don't even give people the LLO.
Yeah.
Can't. So it's too many letters.
We shorten even the sound that we made up that has no meaning behind it. And it might, but in our language, I mean, hell wouldn't be a great greeting for someone. So I'm guessing it's not related to our afterlife thoughts of
go ahead. Sorry.
You say hell when you're coming in.
Oh, yeah.
and God when you go. I don't know. I don't think it's that literal. And so I really love it that the word shalom is the way they greet each other. I wish Christians would start adopting more meaningful ways of communication where we understand our words, we use our words very deliberately, and they are this constant, ordinary reminder of how epic and important our day-to-day life is and the decisions we make and how we treat each other and what our purpose on planet Earth is.
Yeah.
And
because that's like obviously very important to God. Like my first thought that comes in my head is you have the naysayers that might say like, that's just semantics. Like it's not that big of a deal, but I think it is a big deal. I really do, because you look at how God communicated his purposes with the people in the Old Testament. It's a lot of what we would say are semantics. It's a lot of small things that we would say are like, that's so much extra work. Like that, you know that I feel that way about you. You don't need me to say all of that or do all of that. But it seems like it's important to him. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like that's something that that he really, I don't know if it's that God really enjoys that or finds it really meaningful to us. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
um,
I
definitely is
think,
important to him.
yeah, and I want to start to recapture some of that, but I also feel kind of dumb when I start saying shalom to people and kind of feel the need to
You're that guy.
like make it funny so people don't take it too serious, like
Shalom.
shalom, shalom. Yeah, like I can't just do it seriously for some reason, which I wish I could, because to me it's a really special word. It really, I think, in a word brings me to figuring out like this is what we're all aiming at. And this, so, and to say that to each other every time we see each other and when we part ways, I think you're pronouncing like this is the point of our lives. Um, this is the point of our lives. So I'm going to remind you of that when I see you, and I'm going to remind you of that when we leave each other.
Yeah.
It's all about shalom. And so it's where we started in the story of humanity, and it's where we're going in the story of humanity is shalom. And from tree to tree, the tree that was in the garden, the tree that will be, in the kingdom to come, it's all about restoring shalom on planet Earth that we
Yeah.
once enjoyed with being one with God.
Yeah.
So,
Well, with all that in mind, do you want to talk about some practical examples you've been thinking of?
yeah, so there's so if humans are for making peace or making shalom or being, Jesus is the Prince of Shalom, and we have this fuller meaning in the back of our head. Um, would we be people that help stop wars? Yeah, we would. Will we be people that help broker reconciliation in relationships that are broken? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So we can all, agree that shalom and pursuing peace, being peacemakers. By the way, like in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," in Hebrew, would that technically be like the shalom makers?
I think so.
Okay. So if that's what we're up to on planet Earth, yes, of course it's dealing with those things. But what I see it really fizzle out in, to me, is humans live in I don't know, just like fish in water, like we're in something too. Like it surrounds us, it touches us, we're moving through it constantly. This world that we're placed in, the air that we breathe. And I don't think we're always bringing that shalom and peace um, to those environments.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, ironically, I think it makes us mistreat each other
Mm-hmm.
because we screw up this relationship with the created world a lot. And then that causes a deficiency and, there being enough for everyone. And then, then we get back to warring and broken relationships. And so it like ping pongs back and forth. But I wanted to give you guys a few kind of examples of just like, if we were really going to be pursuing shalom on earth in a proactive way, I think we would definitely be, there's a couple things where it's like, I think we would be taking a second look at how we do prisons, how we incarcerate people, how we rehabilitate people or don't really. We just kind of, lock them up and then hope they get better when they're out. How we talk about addiction and other just forms of slavery, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to do a few just examples in the created world on the earth side of things and animal side and all that kind of stuff. So there is a book that, well, first of all, there's an author that I love. His name is Wendell Berry, and he's one of my favorite authors. He's a poet laureate of Kentucky, but he writes poetry and just kind of essays, and he's got a little bit of everything. He's a really cool dude.
Mm-hmm.
But this is it's a book called Art of the Commonplace. If you guys can see that on, I don't think it's all washed out, but
Yeah.
anyways, Art of the Commonplace takes a lot of his essays and puts them into one big book, so you don't have to go buy like 15 books.
Right.
And one of the stories I thought was really interesting was about He's from Kentucky. He's living on like a 5th-generation farm. Basically, his descendants go back to like the 1700s when they were like foraging through, and Kentucky was the Wild West, even though we think the Wild West is like Arizona or something. And so his people go back that far, and so he has a really rich, history with that place, and he's farming the same land that people did 200 years ago. Even though he's moved to like New York City and got a job, like some of the bigwig places for literature and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He returned home to Kentucky to write because he's like, you know what? I kind of got scooped up in that whole like, I'm gonna be a tenured professor at Yale or whatever. He's like, I just want to go back to Kentucky, and he kind of gave up on that whole pursuit, which I think is really honorable. But anyways, he's telling the story of his little hometown. It's called Newcastle, and he's telling a story of these like some of the first people that showed up there, and they need to build a road from where they're at and some of their farms to what they're going to make the new capital or the of their county, basically. And these are kind of what we would call the founding fathers, of his neck of the woods instead of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. These are his people, and so these are like really distinguished people. A lot of history behind them. They made Kentucky what it is today type people. And I just thought the story was really interesting. And I'll start out here as kind of this is our relationship. Think about Shalom the whole time I'm talking about this. So these people were dressed in buckskin pants and leather belts and a scabbard, a big knife fastened to their belt. They had hats and caps, and they wore moccasins and like a hunting shirt. And just imagine these like old school dudes, like everything they're wearing is something they killed and like took the skin off of it and slapped it on their body. And they're carrying like those powder horns for their guns and little shots for their bullets, and then a gun, a tomahawk. They're ready for anything, right? They're just ready like to take it on. And so these guys, could clear ground, they could raise corn, kill turkeys, deer, bear, and buffalo. And when it became necessary, they understood the art of fighting Native Americans as well as any man in the United States. So they're just all around, just don't mess with this guy. This type of guy. So they got 100 of these dudes together, and they're going to clear some land as a road from point A to point B for their new little capital there. And it says 100 of these guys get together, they get ready to work. Everything's jovial and like happy-go-lucky, and they're getting stuff done. This is around 1797. Okay. And it was cold out. They got a lot of work done that day. They had like a little captain of the 100 guys just telling them what to do and where to go. And they're just clearing like I don't know if you guys can even imagine like what trees they're running into here. These are like multiple 100-year-old trees, and they're cutting them down just like
willy-nilly.
You gotta move. Yeah. And I can't imagine. And these trees were bigger than we could put our arms around, and they're just letting them down. And there's actually, I was just thinking about this the other day, like redwoods and all that kind of stuff. Those things actually existed a lot more out on the east side of the country before we started cutting stuff down. We don't even have an imagination for it because we don't know what a tree that old looks like because we've always cut them down before they get that old. But anyways, it says at sundown, the captain, after a short address, told us the night was going to be very cold and make very large fires. So they take these trees, they light just ginormous tree fires and pile them up. And it says that these guys that would typically be like the founding fathers, really jovial, we're getting the work done, we're all kind of whistling as we work. All of a sudden, they get kind of bored after they make these ginormous fires and start like a war where they're throwing like flaming wood at each other. And the only rule was to throw wood that was flaming so that the other team had a chance to dodge it in the, in pitch darkness. You're in the wilderness, just to make sure that the wood you're throwing is on fire so people have a chance to dodge it. And so
listeners out there, this is why you stop the bonfire.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you get to midnight.
I know I'm saying these bonfires were probably like 20 feet tall.
Yeah, send everybody to bed.
And so they went on and on to where they were running out of ammunition, and it got to the point where they just start throwing like rocks and sticks and anything they can get, because it's kind of like, you got me, I'm going to get you back kind of thing. So then people are getting like hit in the face and stuff by stuff they can't. So you're just in pitch dark getting hit in the face with like rocks and stuff. And so these guys went from being very like, just having fun. It says that all of a sudden, it says that like blood started to flow and people were like seriously wounded, and all this, it became rude all of a sudden. And okay. So then the captain's just like, all right, that's enough. Like, shut it down. Basically, the youth minister steps in and is like, all right, that's enough. It says that some were severely wounded, blood began to flow freely, and they were in a fair way, commencing a fight in earnest. So they're about to actually like brawl. And I was, okay, so these are like the founding fathers of Kentucky are out in the woods having like a flaming wood fight. And then it turns kind of ugly, and the captain has to stand up and be like, hey, you people that are about to found our state, stop, cut it out before you all kill each other. And they go to bed. And so then here's kind of more of the commentary. So it's like the significance of this bit of history is in its utter violence. The work of clearing the road was itself violent. And from the orderly violence of that labor they were doing, these men turned for amusement to disorderly violence. They were men whose element was violence. The only alternative they were aware of were those within the comprehension of main strength. So I know this is kind of using old school English, but these guys, like everything about them had to be violent because they were taking on like Mother Nature herself and forging new paths and doing all this stuff. And a part of us, and even Wendell Berry, is just like, when I read these stories, I'm like proud of these guys. Like they were feisty and they were fighters and they were all this kind of stuff. So I'm kind of proud of them. But when we really reflect on it, he starts reflecting on like the native peoples that had lived on that land for say 10,000 years. These guys have been on the land, what? They just gotten there.
In comparison, like 20 minutes.
20 minutes versus like 1,000 years or 10,000 years. There have been people living on this continent the whole time. And so he starts to talk about when the native peoples would travel, it would just be a path, right? Mm-hmm. And I've never thought about this before, but I thought it was a good kind of analogy for what we are like versus what other maybe native peoples were like. And it's the difference between, what's the difference between a path and a road?
One is,
I'm putting Daniel up to this, so if he just...
A path is usually like you're just walking on top of what is there. You're trying to make less impact. It's usually 1 or 2 people wide, maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
Maybe you put down some dirt. You pick up some dirt from somewhere else and just kind of clear it out a little bit to get the brush away. A road is like, let's get some trucks in here. It's got to be straight. It can't have as many turns because, cars. We got to pave it. It's got to have sewage.
So when a path comes in contact with an obstacle, what does a path do?
Go around it.
And what does a road do?
Go through it.
Over it. Yeah, whatever.
Kill it.
So kill it. And so for him, the path versus the road becomes like this analogy of, these native peoples, they had ways of getting around, but when they came to the obstacle, the path would navigate as the terrain would dictate, right? Mm-hmm. And they made their way through. Whereas the way that these guys are treating the land, it's like, hey, this tree's my way and it's got to go, and that's just violence. You're like, this thing in my way is unacceptable and it will cease to exist. Dang it. Because I've got places to be. Right. And so anyways, he uses this whole story is kind of like, if a Native American was to stay warm that night, they wouldn't have cut down like these 1,000-year-old trees and burned them in like a huge pile and hope that like it keeps them warm all night. He would have built a small shelter, built a small fire off of like stuff that's just laying around, and he would have kept himself just as warm. But when he was gone in the
Way less
morning,
impact.
yeah, way less impact. And so what they are talking about is the fact that because we don't know a place, like these guys didn't know that place.
Right.
They're just steamrolling over it. And I don't know if, I mean, what it reminds me of is not just trees, but like when we are on an interstate and we're driving in Tennessee, we have a lot of hills. We'll be going through a place where they've cut like 100-foot cliffs into a hill because they're like, I don't want the road to go up and then back down. I want to go through this hill, and this hill is in the way. So now every time I drive past an interstate, I'm like, we are a placeless people. We don't know anything about this place. It's not our home. We don't know how to dance with it and how to work with it. And every time I drive past those cliffs on the side of the interstate where we've just plowed through, it's just a reminder of those, like, we are violent people when we don't know the place that we're working with.
Yeah.
It's the only way we can be. And that's what he says about these guys. So here's my last little reading here. It said the road builders, he's talking about, the native peoples and how they would treat the land. It says the road builders, on the contrary, were placeless people. That is why they didn't know. It says they knew very little about the land. Having left Europe far behind, they had not yet any meaningful sense arrived in America, not having devoted themselves to any part of it in any way that would produce the intricate knowledge of it necessary to live in it without destroying it. Because they belonged to no place, it was almost inevitable that they would behave violently towards that place they came to. We still have not, in any meaningful way, arrived in America. And in spite of our great reservoir of facts and methods, in comparison to the deep, earthy wisdom of established people, we still know but little. And it's just like, it's just a sad, I don't know, man. It just bums me out when I think about how we treat places, how violent we are towards them. And then also how many people I know that feel this constant sense of off. I feel off. I don't feel right. I don't feel, just my life is unsettled.
I don't feel complete.
I don't feel right in this place. There's no shalom in people's lives. And you may think it's like, it's just a tree, man, chill. It's like, yeah, but the place will take care of you if you take care of the place. If you really devote yourself, like, no part of America has been, let's sit back and watch how this continent works, and let's get into the work with it.
It's like, new free land, we're gonna just use it up.
It's just boom. It's if there's a tree and it's like, is this your tree? Do you want it? Okay, I'll just take it. And it's like, well, how many trees do you need? It's like, I mean, I only need like one tree to keep me warm this winter, but there's like 100 trees right here and no one's claiming them. So I'm gonna cut them all down.
Made $99.
Yeah. And so that's the way we've treated things. And I just thought that line of, in any meaningful sense, we have still not arrived in America. Like, that's just we've just been steamrolling this place since the day we got here, whether it was 1797 or 2020.
Right.
Every time we see something in the way, instead of being like, how can I work with this? We're like, you got to go. And we just move on through. And so, yeah, it talks about, just a lot of things. Says that road from the site of Newcastle to the mouth of the Kentucky River, lost now by either it's evolved over the years or been paved over so many times you wouldn't notice it now, but now is being crossed and to some extent replaced by its modern counterpart known as I-71. And I have no wish to disturb the question of whether or not this road is needed. I only want to observe that it bears no relation to whatever the country it passes through. It's a pure abstraction, built to serve two abstractions that are the poles of our national life: commerce and expensive pleasure. Those are the two things that we serve. It was built not according to the lay of the land, but according to a blueprint. Such homes and farmlands and woodlands as happen to be in its way are now buried underneath it. A part of a hill near here that would have caused it to turn one way or the other, simply cut down and disposed of as thoughtlessly as the pioneer road builders would have disposed of a tree. Its form is the form of speed, dissatisfaction, dissatisfaction, and anxiety. Isn't that kind of like who we are in a nutshell? It's just like, who is America? We are trying to get somewhere, but we don't know where, and we don't know why.
And we're dissatisfied.
And that makes me anxious. You're like, yeah, that's pretty much just in a nutshell, isn't it? It's like its form is the form of speed, dissatisfaction, anxiety. It represents the ultimate in engineering sophistication, but the crudest possible valuation of life in this world. It is as adequate as a symbol of our relation to our country now as that first road was of our relation to it in 1797. And you're bringing it, brother. It makes me want to cry a little bit. I mean, I remember these neighborhoods that I grew up in. It was like Daisy Trail and, Cedar Meadow and all this stuff. And you're like, I had this realization even as a high schooler. I was like, isn't it interesting? Like the street I grew up on was Twin Oaks Lane. They talk about these 2 twin oak trees that were ginormous. And the street actually went up to them, parted into a left and right lane that went around them, kind of like a roundabout, and then like continued on. But when the city came, that was a private street that all the people on the street maintained. When they handed it over to the city was like, bump that, dude. These trees are coming down. And they paved over these trees and cut them down. But it's like, but don't worry, we'll name the street Twin Oaks Lane.
We'll tell the story.
So all these places are like, we name our streets that are, like he said, an indicator of like, we're trying to get somewhere, we're busy, we have things to do, we're dissatisfied more, and that causes me anxiety after the things that we killed to get there. Like
neighborhood signs are like gravestones.
Yeah, they're like, hey, this is the thing we killed to do this thing, which, by the way, I think actually works with, MLK Boulevard and Rosa Parks Boulevard. It's like, here are things that we steamrolled, to get to where we are today.
And we kind of sort of feel bad. And so we're going to put
we'll be like, wasn't that beautiful? Yeah, we missed that. Anyways, and then we're on to the next thing. And I'm like, that's the opposite of shalom. Shalom is to look at how it works, look how we can work in the work with the way that everything moves and breathes, and be a part of that. And so it reminds me that a lot of people are starting to theorize, and I think there's been some real studies behind it, that like the Amazon basin, if you know the statistics of it, it's like of all of our medicines that come out of it and the biodiversity of it, it represents like disproportionately higher numbers of how many species there are there, both in plant, mushroom,
including
animal.
We haven't even discovered.
Yeah, we're still discovering stuff in there. A lot of people believe that the Amazon basin, i.e. anything where the Amazon River, rolls, was in a giant, what we call a food forest, permaculture food forest, which is it's kind of like a garden that starts gardening itself once you set it up. And it's like,
it's not meant to look pretty
no.
Yeah.
But if you know what you're looking at, you're like, this tree feeds that tree, this tree gives fruit, that fruit is something that humans and other things can eat. Whenever we eat something, we digest it and it turns into fertilizer faster than if it were just to fall on the floor and have to rot in a slow way. And so we're actually accelerating this process and returning nutrients back to the soil and all this kind of stuff. And anyways, they think that the native peoples in, South America were actively gardening this thing, but because gardening and farming to us looks like mow it all down and plant one thing, that we haven't recognized it with our modern eyes. But when we look at the biodiversity of it, a lot of people are turning on to the fact that it's like, this had to be a managed effort. We're also finding something called biochar that's planted or that's buried in a lot of the soil, which is, I don't know if you've seen, like after a fire that didn't completely all turn to white ash, there's those black, briquette kind of things that are left there. They buried that stuff on purpose because in there I don't know if you've heard of like activated carbon filters and all that kind of stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
they are so good at, there's like microscopic billions of miles of like what I would call maybe caverns in there, like little
Mm-hmm.
microscopic caverns, and they can lock up and hold nutrients and do all this special stuff. And
But they
it's just,
couldn't get down there on their own.
it's like buried all over the place. It's like, oh, these native peoples were burying this like burned wood everywhere, and that has caused like this nutrient like situation that's really unique. And anyways, so I just think that's really interesting, and it makes me reflect on like humans. I think in general are a keystone species, and I don't know. Let's just like go back to seventh grade, science, whatever. We talk about like keystone species and ecological stuff, but a keystone literally is an arch, like a Roman arch has, goes like up on the sides. It has an arch on the top, and the middle wedge stone is called the keystone. And if you pull a keystone out of like a literal building, aqueduct, arch, or whatever, the whole thing would
Crumble.
crumble in on each other. And so if you call something a keystone species, you're calling it, if that thing disappears, then it's this huge, cascade effect that goes down from there, which is called a trophic cascade. That's a negative.
Mm-hmm.
And so because like Wendell Berry was trying to say, we as modern humans are so disregarding of our environments. I don't know how we can feel shalom very often or feel like we are at peace. But
we
it
think
makes,
it's unrelated.
Yeah, we're just like, yeah, what does it matter? But then if you really step back, you're like, even mowing your yard every week is just kind of like, this isn't what this place wants. If you walked away from this, came back a year later, this place would not be a manicured lawn. Like, it wants to be something else all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't want it to be that, you're constantly going to be in a battle that's going to take your time and your resources to battle. And it will never end. I want everyone to know, unless you like nuke your yard and turn it into dirt, it will never stop fighting you because it wants to be something else.
Right.
And so why don't you turn it into a food forest? Why do you need your yard? Do you actually even go out there? Do you actually even use it? Let it be what it wants to be, except manage it like the Amazon basin into something that feeds humans. And that's called a food forest. And I want you guys to think about that and go read about food forests and turn your yard into it, because it's a big waste of time and money for your yard to be anything that we call a yard right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really follow the whole thing backwards, we're trying to pretend like we're French royalty, because the only place in the world that had lawns were like at Versailles. And we're trying to be miniature royalty here in America and pretending like we have the time and the effort to do all this stuff, but they did it with slaves. We're accomplishing it, and we're the slaves that have to go out and do that work. And it's like, why are we doing any of this stuff? It's such a waste of time. It doesn't feed us. It doesn't do much for us. It's like, well, my kids can go around and play. It's like, look, playing in the woods is always more fun. I don't care who you are. I grew up playing in the woods.
Yep.
It's fun. It's just as fun, and the kid will probably learn more. And you can't build good forts with grass, so just deal with it. Get over it, right? It's just like, what? But why is that such a? I've had some really not fun conversations with people about yards and lawns. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's like, back off, dude. I gotta have my grass. And you're like, why? It's wasting your life. And so, anyways, I think that humans have done such a poor job of it in our lifetime that it starts to make and convince me that like humans are the problem. If you talk to some extreme like environmentalists, they're like, the best thing that could happen for Earth is for humans to all die and it get to move on without us.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at the Amazon basin and you're like, it makes you think, and humans are inherently the problem. It's just our modern version of us
we're also if we flip it and view it correctly, are the best solution.
We are like the keystone species of all the keystone species.
I mean, it's not what it says in the beginning of Genesis.
I mean, that's
like, is that the point?
Yeah, I know, but
like,
we don't think about it like
that.
Yes, absolutely. We are the keystone species that should be able to look at all the other keystone species and place them where they're needed to form landscapes and
Help them
bring
be the
healing
best they can be.
and bring shalom. So
Yeah.
what a great example of just a few, I've got three, is that we took wolves out of Yosemite Park out west in the United States because we thought, well, they're predators. They're going to kill things. And that's what predators do. But they stopped moving the elk around Yosemite Park. So the elk were like, well, if I ain't got to go nowhere, I'm just going to eat right here. They would even like hang out really close to the water's edge, which they wouldn't typically do if there's predators around. And so they're like destroying a lot of habitat there on the creek. So it was eroding really bad because all those plants that hold the creek bed are getting screwed up. And they just were basically
Started falling apart.
the park was starting to turn into a desert because the elk were, doing their thing and not moving around. So it doesn't sound like the right thing, but it's like, let's put those animals back in that eat things. It's like, why would you do that? Just like, well, the magic of it was that they started to move the elk around and manage them. Because, the other option is for humans to go out there and they're like, hey, elk, move on, move on. Yeah. So like we could waste our lives doing that, I guess. That wouldn't be a waste, but there's an animal that wants to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, what would he get paid and how much? It's like, oh, you just have to let him loose and he'll figure out the rest.
He'll do it. He knows the system.
It's like we could let bees be bees, or we could go around with toothbrushes and try to pollinate every flower on planet Earth. It's like, just let the bees be the bees, man. Okay, this is stupid. And so they let the wolves be the wolves, and Yosemite has taken a huge, huge different direction over the last 25 years since they reintroduced them. It has even changed the way that the creeks flow and the way that the river flows throughout the park, because isn't that crazy to think a wolf, you're like, are the wolves down there like digging it, and they're digging like the Panama Canal down there, and they're like, well, I want the river to go this way. It's like, no, the way that they have managed the elk, and the elk eat plants differently, so on and so forth, is actually allowed for a lot more beavers to come in. So then the beavers, make their dams, and beavers themselves are keystone species where if they're in a landscape, they're called like the kidneys of the landscape, where they keep water from, like when there's a hard rain, it's going to pick up nutrients and good dirt and it's going to go to the creek. Well, they create little dams to where that good stuff settles in and stops it from going out to the ocean. And so anyways, they all have these cascading positive effects, but humans that I know and myself, I'm like the anti-keystone. It's like the Antichrist. We are doing the opposite. We are very good at creating cascades of negative effects, where we're like, holy cow, what's happening here? We have no idea. This whole place turned into a desert. And you're just like, yeah, that's you, man. You're like, what? I didn't do anything. I just stay inside all day and play video games. And you're like, no, you're doing it, man. Like, you're a part of it, this whole
and then
thing.
We try to Band-Aid fix the effects of the cascade.
Right. And the last one is this. This is a really interesting story. There's a good TED Talk on this. His name is Alan Savory. He's from South Africa, and he was a zoologist, ecologist that was put in charge of managing all of their public land in South Africa. And if you don't know anything about that there's a lot of elephants there. And so people from all over the world come to see, the savanna and the elephants there. And it was turning into a desert. They were having a lot of erosion problems, just everything was turning into sand, and he's brought in, and it's like, okay, what should we do? So he does the math, and he says, this is how many plants we have. Elephants eat this much, plant matter a day. That means we need to kill like 40,000 elephants. And he's like, when I came up with that number, I was like, oh, this is terrible. I can't even believe this. So he took it to other academics and people that knew what's what. And he's like, please tell me I'm doing my math wrong. Like, my conclusion is that we need to kill like 40,000 elephants. And so sure enough, they're like, no, we see the same math. You're not doing the math wrong. And so they end up culling out 40,000 elephants out of South Africa to try to get the ground to bounce back. But it accelerates. It gets even worse. And so what they realize is that there's some seeds that don't germinate unless it's like literally an elephant poops, like eats it, and it goes through their digestive tract. The acids and everything in their stomach like cause it to know it's time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also like deposited in their dung that is this like fertilizer and moist,
They step on it.
situation. It's ready to go, right? The other thing is there's some seeds that don't germinate unless the elephant steps on it. And obviously when an elephant steps, it makes like a little indention. So that's a little place that holds water and stays a little bit more moist and collects, some grass or something over the top of it. It's a perfect little environment for these seeds. And when they feel that intense pressure of an elephant's foot on it, it's like, oh, it's time.
Mm-hmm.
And they took all these 40,000 elephants out. And all of a sudden, there's a lot less elephant manure and there's a lot less footprints around. And it started getting worse all of a sudden. And they're just like, why? There should be more plants for all these elephants. And we should be the keystone species of keystone species. We should have stopped long enough to watch and to know, how does this wolf work? How does this beaver work? How does this elephant work? How does this world that we're living in work? Because we're like, it's just strange. It's like the sun is responsible for keeping all life on planet Earth, receiving energy to not just, the whole thing would just implode, right? If we didn't have the sun on us every day. Right. It's like humans living 100% of their time on Earth from birth till death underground and being like, I don't know why I feel depressed all the time. You're just like, brother, there's a sun up there and it's keeping everything going. And we were made to live in the light. Like, can we just agree on that? But like, we don't face our houses. Like when you build your house and decide which way to point it, you don't go, well, the sun comes up here and it goes down there. And then we just go, well, the road's there and I'm going to point it at the road because I want people to see my front door and to be able to plant pretty plants around it. It's like, is the road keeping you alive on planet Earth? Like, why are you bowing down to the road and not saluting the sun? You know what I'm saying? So we're just, please, we are a keystone species, but when we fail, like a beaver has to build a dam. It just has to. It must.
Can't help it.
It must. A wolf must hunt. It must feed itself. It has to. Does this make sense? And it's just like, humans are different though. Some of us, we don't have the right must. I must do this. We need to find a new must. And it should be pursuing shalom all the time, 24/7. It's like, whatever I do, I want to go into broken places, dark places to bring light and life and reconciliation and goodness back to it. Preach. That should be the thing, like building a dam for a beaver. We just have to. We must.
Right.
And if we don't do that, we will be people that send cascading effects through our own lives, our own relationships, the very world that we choose to. We will be a curse to the place that we say, this will be the place I'll spend my days. Everything around you will be like Sid, in Toy Story. The glory that you'll emanate is darkness.
Yeah.
There'll be just dolls and skull and crossbones, just pieces and blown apart and violence. That will be your essence that you'll spread out.
Using
you'll be
the sun to kill as opposed to let it give life.
Yeah, exactly. He's using the magnifying glass to melt things. And
I think
be something else. Be Andy. Be the one that's like joyful and good and lighthearted and imaginative. And his essence emanates out from him. His glory emanates out from him for this beautiful world where there's relationships and friends and stories. And, he's having this whole fairy tale in his head where he has these friends he plays with in his room. I think that when most of us come to a piece of land, the land groans and says, I'm cursed because this one is not a shalom person. This one is an ignore and plow through. This is a road person, not a path person.
Yeah.
And so I want to be different. I want us all to be different because I want us all to experience shalom.
Yeah, word. I also think we view people the same way. And you may not, if you're a God-fearing, Jesus-following person, you might think, well, I don't do that. I'm nice to everybody. But I would say you check yourself, because I think there's a lot of ways in which the way we handle our relationships, we have the ability to seriously destroy passively or actively, and we have the ability to passively and actively bring life into other people's lives. And the way that you treat other people, the way that you talk to other people or don't, the way that you love or don't, is making a huge difference. And I'm not talking about like just every time you see a homeless person, giving them some money. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about every person that you come into contact with feeling the love of God, feeling life, feeling peace, feeling shalom because of how you're treating them. And if it means that you start housing them, you do that. If it means you start consistently feeding them, you do that. But you don't just fix the Band-Aid issue and throw resources at them, throw programs at them. You try to find when you run into somebody, chances are you are a couple steps down the cascade of things that have happened to them, things that have been done to them or that they've done, ways that they have fled from life. You're a couple steps down, and the solution is not to just handle that step. The solution is not to just fix that thing, because that will keep coming back. The solution is, let me take care of you. Let me do my job, the thing I can't help but do, which is share the love of Christ with you. And let's go back to the root. Let's go back to the start. Like let's go all the way back to the beginning, and let's find the issue here, and let's restore. Let's find the gaps. Let's find the things that are incomplete and bring it to wholeness and restore it. Yeah. And we don't do that. We really don't. We spend a lot of time focused on ourselves, focused on making sure we're right, making sure we're complete. And while that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. Spending all of our time focusing on that, and then wondering why in the world around us is falling apart.
Right.
We see so much tension racially, economically. On Facebook, we see people just saying outlandishly mean things to each other. And we're thinking like, wow, how does it come to this? Why does it feel like we're falling apart? Like we have set this up to fail for ourselves,
because we're treating people,
the ones who have the ability to fix it,
because we're road builders. Like, and when that person is in our way and they don't agree with us, we're not a path person that's like, okay, I'm going to work with this terrain and this path will wind as it will wind. We're like, oh, you're in the way, you got to go. Yeah. And we steamroll people in our relationships all the time. I was trying to do it more in like a literal, practical, like we actually do this and the way we treat the earth.
I think that's great. It gives us a lot of good language to talk about.
Yeah. So
relationships.
Yes, exactly. We do the same thing with relationships where we just steamroll and we're like, hey, you're in the way. I gotta get somewhere.
And then we step back and ask, like, why is there an issue here?
Right. So what I was thinking of when you said all that was that we as people and the relationship front, we ask that question, what do I need? And that's something else that Wendell Berry says in his book. It's not bad to ask like how can I take care of myself? How can I, but the way you answer that question, like you were asking before, like what think about yourself and all that kind of stuff, it's okay. Like God knows you need to, like, you're alive and you need to take care of yourself. That's not, having that thought's not the bad part.
Nothing wrong with that,
it's answering it with, if to take care of me, I need to have everything I want, whatever I want it. This place out there, the tree needs to take care of me.
Yeah.
And we think of it as in like, that means I need to cut down the tree. But what we need to do, and he uses another analogy between like gardeners and miners. A miner says, what can I take as fast as I can take it? And then when it's all gone, move on to the next thing. A gardener looks at the place, instead of saying, how can this place take care of me? A gardener says, how can I take care of this place? And as they do that work, the place will actually take care of them. So ironically, the miner thinks he's answering his question of what do I need, when he's really not. Yeah. The gardener is actually asking a different question of what does this place need, and ironically actually answering the question of what do I need.
Yeah.
He's going to find that in taking care of the place, because
Yeah.
it'll be a reciprocal, joyful dance that they're in. Whereas a miner's just like, cool, gotcha, and then on to the next, and then feel empty inside every day and not really know why. And
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking of. It's like, it's okay to ask the question. We just need to start answering it differently and say,
Amen.
what does this place need? And to know it, intimate knowledge of each other is so important. And that includes the space that we're in. We need to intimately know each other as humans, God. We need to intimately know ourselves, man. I don't think a lot of us even know who we are,
Yeah.
what we're doing on this planet. So how in the world could you intimately know someone else when you don't know you? How could I tell Daniel who I am?
Mm.
And how could I, if I don't know who I am, how do I know how I should relate to the place that God plopped me down? He plopped me down in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know, like, I think I know why, but I think a lot of people are just like, it's just a place, man. I could do life anywhere on planet Earth and wouldn't make any difference. And if you're really saying that, then you're not being human anymore as God designed you. You're being something else. You're a fish that's trying to climb trees. You're a monkey that's trying to swim to the bottom of the ocean. You're just off all the time. And it's so much so that I think that many of us are like fish that have lived out of water so long that there's these fairy tales going around about fish used to live underwater, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew that. They're like, no, 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 no. And it's like, yeah, back in the day, we could actually breathe water, and we lived down there. And they're like, that's nonsense, man. You think we can breathe water? Seriously? That's dumb. But then this Jesus guy comes around and he's like, look, I'm a human, 100% human. Watch this. And he heals the blind, or he raises someone from the dead, or he walks on water, or he feeds 5,000. And every time he does it, he's going, hey, by the way, I'm a human. 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 And they're like, oh, Jesus, all these people are hungry. Should we send them away? He's like, no, don't send people away that want to know more about God. And they're like, okay, well then how are we going to feed them? And then Jesus is like, you feed them. They're like, but we're just humans. And he's like, hey, I'm just a human too. Watch me feed 5,000 people. And he does. And I think Jesus is trying to wake us up to that reality of just like, we need to wake up, man. We need to step back and say, why am I here? What's the point of me being on this planet? And try to live into our God nature. And I think Jesus is the number one example of this is a being that's fully animated and motivated by the will of God. That's 1,000% human. This is what his life looks like on planet Earth. And he's looking at us going, by the way, you're a human too. You say it. You're a human, I'm a human. You're a human, I'm a human. And he's doing these miracles and treating people with love and being the Prince of Shalom. And he's like, and you're a human too. But you're acting like animals.
Yep.
Actually, you're acting worse than animals, because animals actually make things
They know
tick.
their job. Yeah.
They know what their job is, and they do it.
Yeah.
We don't know our jobs, and we wake up every day and we don't do it. And because of that, there's cascades of negative evil that comes out of that. And we need to wake up.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is our view of peace, as we'll just say as Americans, as we see it, even that concept is very individualistic, as most things are, because I get to determine what is at peace and what is not. And if something is not, I need it to be at peace. But the biblical concept of peace is one that it's
Big enough
always
for
about
everybody.
the other.
Yeah.
It's always about the other.
Yeah.
And Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Right.
Ultimately, the ones that are called children of God are people who are making peace in the world, making shalom, setting things right in relationships with creation, with God, with themselves. And it's never going to be about them. It's always going to be about the other. It's always an action, always proactive. And it is the thing that we are called to be doing. If you've ever wondered, is being a Christian just going to church every Sunday? Is that really what is that up to? Hear us say And we will say this time and again, like, this is your job.
Yes.
This is your purpose. And this is the best life you will ever live. All of the questions about why things aren't going right, all the questions about why you feel off, will come to find answers when you begin to chase shalom and become a peacemaker.
Yeah. You may say, I don't like being outside, Nate. And you're like, I'm telling you right now that if you want to be in God's kingdom come, you're going to be outside. And you're going to be working with this thing that he gave us in the beginning.
Yep.
Just like Daniel said, a lot of us, just like with the story of Israel, they were slaves in Egypt. They get out of Egypt. They're wandering around in the desert, and they're trying to get to a place to call their own. God brings them into Canaan's land, and they know, just like us, we're not supposed to be slaves. We're not supposed to live in Egypt. This isn't right for us. And then we move out of that slavery into wildernesses of maybe it's better just to be a slave. This is hard. This is scary. I don't know where my meal's coming from tomorrow.
Freedom is difficult.
Very hard. It's difficult. So they're, in some way, Jubilee happens to them. They're released, but then they go out into freedom. Pure freedom is scary. And they're trying to find shalom in a new place. And when they get there, God's like, this is going to be that place. And we keep watching.
This is going to be that covenant.
Yeah, we're watching and waiting for that God man to come around that is the shalom bringer again. It's like, oh, is Noah going to be the God man we're waiting for? Is Abraham going to be the God man we're waiting for? Is so-and-so going to? And instead, Israel, they turn to a new slavery, which is, if we're going to make this thing work, we have to own slaves. We're not slaves anymore, but now we need to build a system where for my one life to be good, I need 100 not good lives, to support that effort. And that is a new kind of slavery in hell in and of itself, and it breeds all kinds of terrible things. And so we get finally in Solomon, it's like, oh, this dude like asked for wisdom instead of riches and everything in this dream he has. And God says, well, I'm going to give you all the rest too. And it starts going really well, and it's beautiful, and it's growing. And it's not just Solomon getting rich, but it says everyone in Israel, every man sat underneath his own fig tree and enjoyed its good pleasure. Does that make sense? Like everyone's enjoying their little Eden, and shalom is going out, out, out. And other nations are being blessed by Israel. And yeah, it's just, you get to that point in the story and you're like, it's going to be him. And then it's not, because he starts storing up stuff and then marrying a bunch of people, and he goes off the rails. But it does give us, for Solomon, him being the shalom bringer, it was good for everybody. It wasn't just good for Solomon.
Yeah.
And then he starts building cities that are just for him to store up stuff.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the story turns and goes south.
And then you share ultimate example in Jesus. No part of that was about him.
No storehouses.
Nope.
So we're not meant to be slaves, but we're not meant to be slave owners. And we've got to come up with a system of shalom where it is good for literally everyone. And that is from human to human, down, all the way through, through the animals, through the plants, and through everything down to the ground. So
amen.
That's what shalom to me is all about. When I say shalom, there's a 2-hour conversation attached to that one word. And I hope that we've done an okay job of that today. The last thing I want to say before we go out is that in our pursuit of shalom, we want financial shalom for people, because there is a trap waiting outside of most of our doors every day to where we could have the opposite of shalom in our finances. And so the church needs to proactively start working on this. And that's why the debt annihilation teams are so important. Now, I just want to put this out there to our listeners. I don't know if you will take me up on this or not, but I know that Daniel and I both, if you're like, man, my church would never do a debt annihilation team, we would never get that off the ground, but that's such a cool idea. I just want you guys, like, as a listenership, whatever the word is, if the people that are listening to me, we want you to be our Patreon supporters. We want for this to grow and for us to be able to make more episodes more often. But let's set all that aside as far as supporting the show. If you guys want to send money to Providence Road or to Madison, we can get seed money 10 grand is what they suggest. Seed money to start. I will make a commitment, everything in my power. If we come up with 10 grand, at least for my congregation, we will start a debt annihilation team. As you know, if we get that seed money, I will go to the elders. I will make that happen. And if any of you guys are like, I want to see that happen, even if I can't get it done from where I'm at in my circumstances, I just want you to know, if you want to give money to that, send it, and we will make it. You know, we'll make that reality.
Reach out to us, and we'll make it happen.
In our context, at least.
Yep.
And we thank you guys so much for being a part of the team, being a part of this conversation. Someone the other day that I know from Madison, she's like, yeah, my dad's listening to you guys all the time. I've never met her dad before. It's so funny to me, but I'm just like, that's so cool. And I'm so glad that they're out there somewhere. And I have no clue who my voice goes out to, but I want to say, I love you guys. Thanks for supporting us. Mm-hmm. We're so thankful for this, getting to have this conversation all the time. And I pray that we can enact some shalom on the world because we're doing this.
God. Amen.
Yeah. All right. Well, we love you guys, and we will be talking to you later. Shalom.